website as well. So this will be recorded for those who couldn't make it today, and if you want to go back and review. Again, we're excited to be launching this resource. This idea and this resource kind of came out of a couple different places. The first was from House Bill 3115, which is a bill that passed in the 2021, our last regular legislative session, that's really closely related to recent federal court decisions that I think many cities are familiar with and have been working with. Martin v. Boise and Blake v. Grants Pass. The legislature enacted a bill that is very much in the spirit of some of the high-level holdings of those cases. And it's a bill that the LOC and member cities and counties worked very closely on with the Oregon Law Center. This website is the first step in our resources to help cities implement the bill, which the effective date for cities to come into compliance is not until July of 2023. So we're still well over a year away from that. But we really see this resource as the first step. There's a lot of technical aspects, of course, to the legal definitions in the bill, as well as how those relate to the work you've all done, your understandings of the federal case law requirements. Our general counsel at the League, Patty Mulvihill, will be putting out a legal guidance, technical legal guidance that is currently being developed with a team of city attorneys right now in this first quarter of 2022. So that is coming. You'll see there's some placeholders on the website for that. But a big part of the intent of House Bill 3115 is not just that cities and counties look at their ordinances and ensure they're in legal compliance. It's really also an intent that local governments kind of holistically consider available resources, shelters, options, housing for people experiencing homelessness in the community before moving forward on an ordinance for what might be reasonable in terms of regulating camping activities in public space. The bill sets a pretty high level standard that any local ordinance regulating the acts of sitting, lying, sleeping be objectively reasonable in the totality of circumstances for that community. And that's a recognition that what's objectively reasonable is going to look very different in cities of different sizes and from different parts of the state. So really it's about, Patty describes it as like doing your math. You can't just punch it into a calculator and come out with your ordinance. It's about the process with your community, the conversation. And so we wanted to put out this package of resources to really enable cities wherever you're at, in recognition of limited resources that local governments have available, what the options are, what other cities are doing around the state, so that you can have productive, informed conversations at the local level and informed decision making on your local ordinances. So this website is a work in progress. It's intended to grow and develop over time. And my hope is that we build a really strong catalog of examples and links and resources from around the state. So really want to encourage you to submit if you have any resources, whether it's a local news article, a link to your city website, or a nonprofit provider partner that's working on a program or a shelter that the city's been working on. Want to include those on the website. And I'm going to get ready to share my screen. Today's really about walking through the resource, helping you understand where the information is, how to access it, what the opportunities are, and I'm really interested in your feedback. So like I said, we can continue to keep this as an active resource and tool for cities as you have your important local conversations. But first, before I switch to a screen share, I want to go ahead and introduce Kate Allen. She is a consultant who the LOC worked with to help develop this resource. Some of you may have met her as we did outreach. So I wanted to give Kate a couple minutes to share her reflections as she met some of you and what this resource, the possibilities behind this resource. So thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Ariel. It's a real pleasure to be here. Just wanted to really appreciate all the work that League of Oregon Cities has put into this and the willingness of members, many of you who we got to talk to through this process, in contributing to this. As a 30-year plus affordable housing and community development practitioner, I'm super inspired by what's going on around the state. You and your colleagues in places both large and small across the state are taking to heart both this combined challenge of, the humanity of people who are experiencing homelessness on the streets of your communities and the impact that that has. And I think what I've truly appreciated is the balance that is being struck around the realities of your roles as leaders in your city. So it's been a real pleasure to work on this. And just to echo Ariel, really look forward to your feedback and where we can make this resource the best it can be for you. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Kate. So I'm going to go ahead and start to walk through the website. I will pause as we get through different sections and to take questions on each section, but also want to encourage folks to drop messages or questions, comments in the chat, and I'll do my best to bring those forward as well. So this is the link that was sent out to everyone who registered and to all of our city leaders that's now live and will be featuring on the LOC website, and we'll be putting out in the bulletin on Friday. But we wanted to first hold this meeting for city leaders to kind of have a safe space before, making any big announcements to the public to kind of discuss what this resource can and can't be, and any further questions you all have around the issues and around the resources. So this is the landing page that you'll get to as part of our resources and reference materials on the LOC website. And this is, just the landing page. It really describes the intent of this, examples and best practices that are working across the state for LOC members who are on the front lines and balancing the needs of people, business, organizations, and building vibrant, resilient communities, obviously with an eye towards addressing homelessness. This resource is intended to fully understand that cities, really aren't direct service providers, don't have the resources to become that. That's not the intention of any of the legislation or what the league's intent is with this resource, but to better understand where the resources are in your community and how to help bring in additional state, federal investment to your communities in partnership with providers, with your county partners, with your health system partners. So we have it broken into sections: understanding homelessness, kind of a baseline starting points, data, communications and public engagement, partners, funding, specific section on shelter and shelter resources, section on homelessness in public space, and that's where you'll see updates in the first part of 2022 on the legal resources. And then additional resources is the piece that we're really looking to build out. Particularly, my dream is to have an A to Z index of cities where you can kind of just see, what is everyone doing, whether it's a safe parking program, whether it's a police liaison, what are some examples and ideas to look at, some contacts. So I'll go straight into understanding homelessness, which you can get to from either link in the middle of the page or on the side. And so we've just linked to some trusted resources from around the state to better understand homelessness. What are the root causes? What are kind of the high level policy options that are considered national, state, local best practices? It's really looking at, it's a combination of factors, right? Inadequate housing supply, rising rents. And then also, what are the needs of those experiencing chronic homelessness, wraparound services, all of those pieces. There's a great report linked here recently from Oregon Community Foundation with Echo Northwest. We have resources on how to talk about homelessness, some of the, kind of government program standard definitions, but also tips for how to help humanize the conversation and center, local conversations around the people involved. There's a Mythbusters resource. There's a lot of kind of assumptions and ideas around homelessness and various things. And so this is a resource to kind of wrap your head around those. And then some more in-depth information around kind of regional housing supply and some recent reports out of our state agency partners. The permanent solution to homelessness is housing. It's cheaper to permanently house folks and provide them services than it is to build shelters or constantly be responding to issues on the street. So really want to make sure we include links to those resources as well. There's also some links and literature here around the disproportionate impact of homelessness and how Oregon's communities of color are disproportionately represented in some of our data, who's experiencing homelessness. So racial disparities and to really help look at, put that lens when you consider available resources in your region and where to focus resources. Again, more resources around permanent solutions to homelessness, permanent supportive housing. OHCS, Oregon Housing and Community Services, is launching another round of their program to help develop and provide services for more permanent supportive housing. That's housing with the wraparound services and rent assistance to keep people permanently housed. And it's really the strongest, most cost-effective solution for people experiencing chronic homelessness or people living with disabilities, substance use disorder. So all of that is contained here. So want to check and see if anyone has any questions on this section. Feel free to raise your hand or drop in the chat. Otherwise, we can move on to the next one.
I have just a quick question. When did you say this was going to be announced?
So you all have the link. It's live. We will be, I think, I'll confirm with Julie, but I think we'll be hosting it, featuring it on kind of the front page of LOC. So when you visit, you can see it, and it will go out in our bulletin, LOC bulletin, this Friday. So the link you received is shareable. Anyone can view it. So yeah, this week. All right, I'm going to move on to data. So we got some really great feedback from some partners and some of you around some of the difficulties with data. It's really important. We felt it was really important to characterize and provide you all with the key data resources around homelessness, whether that's the point in time count that's done biannually or every year, depending on your community, by your local continuum of care. Whether that's the McKinney-Vento homeless student data that the school districts and the Department of Education collects, or whether that's additional data points and information. So we have hosted that all here, but also, the intro really recognizes that it's really important to have a baseline for understanding who's experiencing homelessness in your community, but also understand that the data that we have is incomplete and just tells part of the picture. And you may not see folks who are doubled up or unstably housed, very housing insecure, represented in that data. And so it's really important to work directly with your local providers, culturally specific organizations, homeless liaisons in your school districts, and law enforcement to really provide the full picture of who's experiencing homelessness in your community and where it's best to direct resources. We're also linking to OHCS published county housing data profiles in 2017, which is really a fuller picture of housing need and affordability by county. These are outdated, I will note that, but we wanted you to be aware of kind of the resources or the data sources that are available, and know that the agency will be putting out new housing profiles by county in early 2022, and we will link them here. We linked to the Continuums of Care. Again, those are the entities funded through HUD. And we've got the map here so you can see where that is in your community. You can get to their contact information and websites linked here. Again, those are the entities and kind of continuums that organize the point in time count and then work really closely with your local provider network. And then there's literature and links around, the importance of racial justice and awareness of underrepresentation in the data for communities of color, and new strategies and trends in conducting research that better represents Black, Indigenous, people of color in data collection and in understanding homelessness. Any questions on this section? All right. So again, we'll continue to update this and really encourage you to check those out. These are intended to kind of help you build a snapshot of understanding, again, who is experiencing homelessness and housing affordability in your community. So under communications and public engagement, we have several resources, tips for productive community conversations, how to have conversations about homelessness. We're really hoping to feature some sample communication plans, or if you have any local resolutions or declarations from your city councils or any partnerships that you've developed, we want to share some examples for any communities that have not done that yet and are looking to do so. So look for those here, or please do provide us with resources if you have them. We're also focusing on, the fact that, of course, conversations about homelessness in public space are very difficult. And so there's ways to provide, there's tools and resources here, but also as you're working with providers on the ground and as you're looking at potentially standing up new resources or supporting current resources and providers, it's really important to have clear communications with your community members, with the media. We've seen the challenges that other communities have faced. You can be doing everything right, following all the best practices, standing up shelters, pouring resources into the issue. But if the public doesn't have a clear sense of where public investment is going and kind of a managing of expectations of what's possible and that, no community can solve homelessness overnight, that's a big part of the equation. And so that's kind of the goal of this page. And just, I see in the chat, is this website information open to the public or just members? It is open to the public. We've heard a lot of interest from a lot of the nonprofit providers and housing advocates who work in this space, who are incredibly excited about this resource, because we've realized that it really doesn't exist in the state for anyone working in or focused on homelessness. There isn't really a landing place for community response. And again, the goal is this catalog of what different communities are doing, whether it's city-led, county-led, or in partnership. This is something that we're lacking. And I think part of that is because we've only very recently seen the state increase investments in shelter, in homelessness response. And our goal at the LSC is to ensure that cities' needs are reflected in those investments. We haven't seen that just yet, right? We've seen some of these policy conversations. Meanwhile, cities are stepping up, filling in the gaps. We saw recent investments from the legislature. I'll get to that in the funding for shelters and navigation centers, but we need more than that. So this is part of that longer term strategy. Right now, the link has just gone out to you all and to city leaders with the invitation for today's webinar, but it will be going in our bulletin on Friday and widely available from there. So that's communications and public engagement. Feel free to hop in with any questions. Partners is the next section. This is where we're kind of cataloging and overviewing the kind of universe of community partners and folks that should be at the table in your local regional coordinated efforts, conversations. Obviously, elected officials are key. Working with city community development and planning departments, particularly if you're looking at doing any kind of shelter siting, parking programs, wanting to work with your building code department, public works, all of that. Part of a city, sometimes many cities obviously don't have resources to directly fund services, but can be focusing, your planning and permitting to better support the process, more quickly stand up resources and shelters if that's something that's happening in your community. Working with law enforcement is absolutely a key piece of this. We would love to beef out this section. We know there's a lot of great conversations and leadership and work going on in public safety departments around the state, with homeless liaisons, alternative response strategies, that really key coordination between police and service providers. So we've linked to a few cities with different models, different responses. I think folks know that at the state level, there's been a big focus on programs like Portland Street Response or Cahoots in Eugene. We know that resources and the infrastructure is not there for the majority of communities to really stand up alternative models, but we know that your local police departments are doing a lot of great work. And we really appreciate Police Chief Spalding from the city of Astoria, who's kind of been leading some statewide conversations, I think, with the public safety community. So want to continue to support those ties and foster those ideas. The other piece, and we'll get to that a little bit farther, is behavioral health. You know, even in Eugene, I've heard with Cahoots and different crisis response teams, if there's nowhere for folks to go to get better, to stabilize, to receive treatment, that's a huge part of the equation, as I think you all know. So farther down, we've really highlighted the role of county mental health programs, public health departments as key parts of the equation, part of your local strategy. And would just note that the legislature also made historic investments in behavioral health this last session. Those are all at OHA right now at the Oregon Health Authority, but will be getting administered and deployed through the county public health, other public health providers. And so it's really, now is the time, I think, for cities to be really connecting to their local partners that are directly involved in those resources to talk about how you coordinate efforts. We have, again, highlighted the continuums of care are key. This is really, I think, one of the core main ingredients for your recipe for coordination. Community action agencies, of course, are another key partner. These are the nonprofit organizations that serve the state and currently are the ones receiving the majority of state and state funding for rent assistance, shelter, emergency housing response. And there's active conversations around those funding resources and expanding the state's contracting abilities. But your community action agency, the link is here. I'm sure many of you serve on their boards and are well connected with them, but wanted to flag that important relationship. Coordinated care organizations. There are also funds at many CCOs from your region that can be used for housing or housing related services. And there's also an ongoing effort to tap into Medicaid dollars at the state and federal level. They're working on that at the state level right now. I'm not an expert on the details, but there's a federal waiver in order to tap into the state Medicaid funds to be able to unlock them for housing related services. So your coordinated care organizations, some of them already have kind of community benefit resources that they're contributing or could be contributing to efforts around permanent supportive housing related services. But there is going to be more resources coming. So that's a really key one to be tapping into. Talked about our county partnerships. We also want to highlight the importance of culturally specific organizations and ensuring that you're familiar with who is experiencing homelessness in your community. And when it's people of color, that you're working directly with partners who may not be formal organizations or may not be housing specific organizations, but are certainly attuned to the needs of their communities and are critical partners as you're considering where to target investments and resources. And that also goes for population-specific organizations, considering the specific unique needs of youth experiencing homelessness, LGBTQ, veterans, seniors, and people with disabilities all are disproportionately represented in the data on who's experiencing homelessness and have specific needs, whether that's through accessible shelter or housing. And then just kind of a blanket, realizing that there's a range of providers out there, your local churches, mission-based organizations, many of whom have kind of sprung up or are new through the pandemic or before. Your housing authority, your local housing authority, regional housing authority are a key partner in the housing continuum, providing affordable housing and vouchers, getting people into permanent housing. Your homeless student liaisons in your school districts, really important partner there. So we've got all the links to the contact lists. I think many of you know them, but really wanted to lay that out there for you. Okay, I'm just checking any hands. I'm going to move on to funding. So here we have kind of focused on some of the recent, like I said, there's been recent historic funding and attention to homelessness, shelter needs from the legislature. Oregon Housing Community Services in 2019 really started to focus their resources and put out a broad statewide housing plan in 2019. And that's a good place to kind of go and get a sense of how resources are focused, from homelessness shelter to homelessness to rental assistance, keeping people housed to affordable rental development, preserving existing affordable housing, services, permanent supportive housing into homeownership programs and asset building and foreclosure protection. So that's really kind of the way to think about how resources are focused. We've linked to the most recent investments out of this last session. Is 27 million specifically for shelter infrastructure capacity, technical assistance. The agency is going to be putting out some additional resources from this last session, probably June, July this summer, around growing capacity, better supporting what we're starting to form as a statewide shelter system that really doesn't exist in a coordinated way. And so I'm really focused on having LOC and cities and AOC as well at that table as part of building that network and building that out. And so, we have a lot of opportunities for pilot funding as well coming through that I think some of you are aware of, a lot of attention. So looking at what cities have done, are doing, what the needs are, where the state should be investing in research and technical assistance, consultants that cities and partners can rely on for your local strategies. A big part of that is updating and improving the state homeless management information system. This is how the state and HUD and the federal government track homelessness and various populations. The current system is pretty cumbersome. It's very expensive to access, and not every organization has access or reliable access to update that and to really capture who they're serving and ensure that we're not losing people between different systems, whether they're moving from shelter to their local DHS services office to Medicaid. The state's really trying to work on connecting those dots so we have a better way to track how people getting into housing, measure success, measure gaps and needs. I mentioned that there were direct grants in several bills this session for to stand up new shelters and navigation resource centers around the state. Those are in progress. And then there's a conversation that came out of House Bill 2100 around recognizing racial disparities in homelessness and Oregon's response homeless services system, and what that means for how funding is administered. So that task force conversation is ongoing. Then we go on to lay out, so those are the recent developments in funding. Under federal resources, this kind of gives you the lay of the land of where direct federal funding that doesn't go through the state agency is. So again, that's through your continuums of care. It's through your entitlement jurisdictions who by population receive either direct funding from the Community Development Block Grant Program, Home Program, or Emergency Solutions Grant Program. The majority of the state, those dollars flow through OHCS, or if it's Community Development Block Grant Program, it's through Business Oregon, then to local communities or providers. And we see that right here. So you'll see that reflected in the state agency resources. So we go ahead and list out, where those federal resources live. There's links here to fact pages from the agency on those various resources. And then there's the state funded programs. So emergency housing assistance, EHA, that's kind of been the core rent assistance shelter funding that goes to the community action agencies from state. It's funded through the state general fund and the document recording fee. There's some smaller programs around elderly rental assistance, the state homeless assistance program, wildfire damage housing relief program. And then recognizing, the critical importance of local funding, where we've seen many of you dedicating recent CARES Act and ARPA federal dollars to help with housing stability and services. Of course, in the metro area, they've recently passed major resources for supportive housing services. But then I want to also recognize the role that philanthropic organizations, community banks, local healthcare systems, CCOs, and your local businesses and employers who all feel the need of the lack of affordable housing in your communities. So wanting to make sure that you're thinking of the full spectrum of available partners when you're considering and looking at growing local resources. And then we just have some links and information around permanent supportive housing. Again, that permanent solution to ending chronic homelessness, and how, economically as well as, morally, this is the solution. It's far more cost effective to permanently house folks, provide them the services they need to stabilize and remain in housing than it is for emergency services, police, public safety, to be, responding on a crisis basis on the criminal justice system, on hospitals, just a more cost-effective method. So I see a note in the chat from Roger. Many of our unsheltered individuals suffer from mental health afflictions. Investment in housing is, of course, important. But unless we improve the delivery quantity of mental health services, it may be very difficult to keep them housed. Absolutely. Again, that's why your county partners are really critical here, and your health system partners. And we've seen some initial large investments from the state, and LOC is going to be tracking those. And I think it's going to be in the next year that we're going to kind of see some more details about how those flow out around the state. And but really want to be hearing from you and working with you as we look ahead to the next 2023 long session and policy decisions, funding decisions, ensure that investments in behavioral health are reaching your communities and are connected to the housing needs. That's really important, of course, is that coordination. So on shelter resources, this section, this is where we really see some examples, specific examples from around the state. So the Oregon kind of in what led to a lot of these recent investments in shelter and homelessness was the Oregon statewide shelter study in 2019. There had really never been an inventory taken of who exactly was providing shelter around the state, the majority of which was not state supported, right? Volunteer run, Salvation Army run, St. Vincent de Paul community organizations. Many communities, if they had anything, were providing, inclement weather, warming shelters overnight, in church basements, and folks would have to leave the next day. Just not really, not enough response that was needed for what we were seeing on the streets. So they conducted that study. They're going to be doing an update to it starting this summer. So we'll see, I think, an updated shelter study probably by the end of 2022. It'll be really interesting, and I think encouraging to see all of the progress and all of the advancements made by the investments in the last couple of years around shelter. Another recent change was the passage of House Bill 2006 in an earlier version passed in the special session in 2020. But the bill that's in effect now basically removes barriers in the land use system to very quickly expedite and stand up new emergency shelter if they meet certain qualifications. And so the Eugene website, I know many cities use as a resource because it very clearly lays out how the bill works. And they also have documented they've received many shelter applications under this law and have cited them through their planning department. And so you can see the process they went through to review and approve emergency shelter siting under House Bill 2006. So really great resource to understand that process if that's something that you haven't dealt with yet in your community. Also important to understand who's served by shelters and who is not. Not everyone can be served by shelters. Not everyone feels safe in a shelter. There's links and literature around the importance of providing low barrier shelter options. That's a key piece of some of the federal court case holding and some of the intent behind House Bill 3115 is recognizing that not everyone is going to be able to access one shelter in a community is not going to be able to serve everyone, whether you need separate services or tailored shelter for families than you do for single individuals, people with pets, people with disabilities based on their gender identity. So understanding low barrier access is really important and something that your provider partners are experts on. And then we get down into kind of different types of shelter here. So, I talked about seasonal emergency shelter. We've seen, unfortunately, the need for cooling shelters now in the summer and respite for people escaping wildfire smoke. And so we've got a couple examples here. We would love to feature more. And again, we'll have that A to Z index at the back. Congregate shelters, that's really the term for kind of what people think of as a traditional shelter model, a bunch of beds in a space, but which we really saw were not a good option or effective during the pandemic when we needed to socially distance. So we saw a really big shift into what is largely called non-congregate shelter, but really we saw pop up as pallet shelters, urban campgrounds, tiny homes. So I'll get to that in a minute. Navigation centers, these are not necessarily overnight shelters, but they're low barrier spaces for people to access and 24/7 with access to services, whether it's mail, showers, meals, access to get their social security, their ID renewed, veteran services. These are kind of hubs for people who, not only need housing, but need all of those important services, mental health care, healthcare. So these are what we saw really funded at a significant level around the state this last session. And we have a list here that Kate helped us put together that kind of outlines those investments from the budget bills this last session that you can look at. And if you weren't one of the communities on that list and you may be ready to come forward and request funding in a future session, I can help you understand that legislative process and work with your legislators to put a proposal forward. We also saw a really big focus on the possibility of using motels for shelter with Project Turnkey and our partners at Oregon Community Foundation. So there's a really great report, if you haven't seen it yet, about everything that was funded through Project Turnkey from the special sessions and the new shelter and transitional affordable housing spaces that have been stood up around the state. I mentioned safe parking programs. They're part of House Bill 2006, the shelter siting bill expanded the ability for local governments to stand up safe parking programs. Before, state statute limited it. Only churches could host safe parking, overnight parking for people experiencing homelessness in vehicles or RVs, and then they were limited to like 2 or 3 spaces. Now, permissively, a city may permit and cite much larger parking programs. And it's not just limited to churches, because certainly there are business owners, other property owners that would like to provide their land. There's no requirement here. You're not required to expedite anything, but gives you that option. So we've got links to some great examples from communities around the state here. And then again, I mentioned a lot of folks have been working with the pallet shelter manufacturers to stand up really quick, small kind of tiny home village type situations. There's also urban camping sites. So some great examples here. One of the pieces that has come up around this, and that'll be part of the legal guidance that comes out, is also just understanding the implications to city liability when it comes to providing public land or public space and your ordinances. So just wanted to let you know we're working with our partners at CIS on that as well, that we haven't forgotten that part of the equation. I know that is something that comes up. So insurance policies, those kinds of things will be things that we get deeper into later on and provide more resources on. Thanks for the feedback. We would be happy to have you host a link to this resource on your website. Feel free. The main link is the orcities.org/resources/reference/homeless solutions. And so feel free to just post that on your website. We're happy to have you link back to us. There's some national resources here. So I'm going to move on. Homelessness in public space. Again, we've got a little synopsis here of the recent federal court holdings for Martin v. Boise, a little mention on Blake v. Grants Pass, which is not binding on the whole state. That was a lower court decision out of Southern Oregon and is currently under appeal. And so, as those updates come out, we'll refresh this page and a little synopsis of House Bill 3115. But again, we've got resources coming well ahead. They'll be coming in the next couple of months. And we want to offer, but based on your interest, some workshops, maybe regionally, come out to your communities and to really dig into the legal guidance that's going to come out and talk about the bill, talk about the case law, but in relation to all these other shelter resources and how it all works for your local community. So we'll be doing that later in the spring and summer, offering that, and hopefully be able to get out around the state safely and visit with all of you. We have linked here on the right previous videos and trainings from recent LOC conferences, specifically around the case law. So those are with some legal firms and attorney partners, and some great Q&A if you really want to get into the details and better understand the case law. So those resources are there. And we'll be updating when we get that legal lens out. You'll see that come out. And then finally, additional resources and links. We'll have national best practices, studies, all kinds of things. Send us things that you think folks will find helpful if you found them helpful. And then we really want to be, again, cataloging city homeless resource programs A to Z. So this is a link here to just quickly email us, myself or Julie, a link, the title of your program, and we'll get it up on the website. We really want to be sharing all of your good work, sharing it with your colleagues so that you all can learn from each other, so you can help inform future LOC trainings, but also very importantly, share that with the legislature, with our state policymakers, so they understand what you all are doing on the ground, what's working, and how to better partner with cities to fund the needs, fund the strategies that are working. So with that, that is the resource as it stands. Again, work in progress. We would love to continue to work with you to flesh this out and continue to build on this. Really appreciate you taking the time in the busy holiday season. We'll be back in January. So please, send in any comments, feedback. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing so we can all see each other. But yeah, feel free to share anything. And as you have ideas, share this with your partners, your provider partners, share this with your communities. We'll continue to add to it. And if another focused webinar in January would be helpful, happy to make that happen. And then we'll wait for that legal guidance to come out and then really focus our outreach and education again after short session in the spring and starting the spring and summer. We'll get out around the state, hopefully. And for sure, virtually online as well for people to gather together. So anyone have any final questions or comments before we don't have to make you stay the whole hour? I'm sure you have many things to do. We'll get this recording up on the website and feel free to share. All right, thank you, everyone. Julie, feel free to go ahead and stop the recording. Please, feel free to be in touch, everyone, and we'll see you next time.